Hello everybody, you're listening to The Art Show on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. This is the weekly radio show where we chat about the local arts news. We have a different guest on each week. We head over to the Rhyolite Zone for a short story and or some poetry. We catch up with Twangling Jack Ford in the Oak Shed for a weekly album review, and we play local, unsigned and or independent music. As always, you can reach out to me here at the studio on dane.cobain at wickhamsound.org.uk. That's dane.cobain at wickhamsound.org.uk. And I'm particularly keen to hear from poets, performers, musicians, people with MP3s to share, people with local arts news. Don't hesitate to get in touch. We're repeating on Wickham Sound on Monday nights. We're on the Wickham Sound Listen Again, iTunes, Spotify and wherever else you get your podcasts. Please do leave us a review on your podcast provider of choice. And so for this week's entry into the Rhyolite Zone, this week's guest, Joe Campling, a poet, is sharing some of his poetry.
Yes, this first poem is called Radio Star. I've only written it in the last week or so, so it is unpublished, so you'll be one of the first people to hear it. Across the airways, my voice takes flight, a radio star shining bright in the night. I speak of love, of hope, of dreams, of all that is good and light it seems. My words, they flow like honey sweet, a serenade for those who'd hear and meet. I speak of stories, of people and life, of joy and pain, of love and strife. My words are poetry, a song to the soul, a symphony of emotions that makes us whole. For in this world of noise and confusion, my voice brings clarity, a sense of illusion. I'm like a companion, a friend to the heart, a confidant to share things that depart. So listen close, my dear listeners out there, for in my voice a message we'll share. Let my voice be your comfort and your guide, a beacon of hope through the darkest of tides. Let my words inspire and lift you up high, a ray of hope that never can die. So hear me now, my dear listeners true, for in my words I speak to you. For I am but a radio star, a light in the darkness, shining afar. The next poem that I'm going to read is called Old Friend. Again, this is something new, and again is unpublished. How many years have passed, how many have flown, and in my mind, which is my own, of longing for a prompt to my poor memory, a moment from my bygone history. I stepped into that crowded cyberspace with longing etched upon my face, and there you were, a sight for my eyes, a familiar face from time gone by. Old friend, the memories that we shared are etched upon my heart with care, of laughter loud and poetry shared, of joy and sorrow all compared. As we talked and caught up on our life, it felt like time had ceased its strife, on all those moments when I grew, the beauty of a friendship true. Old friend, as we bid farewell, our thoughts forever entwined in brain cells, I'll cherish the moment we've just experienced, forever grateful and never delirious. And this third poem is called Friday. It comes from my book, the latest one I published, which was called Poetry in Motion. It's the end of the week, time to start the process of relaxing. It is Friday. TGIF. Maybe I'll be able to sleep in tomorrow, as it is Saturday. But we are not there yet, as the parent says to the child on one of those long car journeys. We still have hours to go. So what is Friday about? Is it to do with all that fish that was fried when I was young? This was accompanied by agricultural chips and those little matches that are all vogue as takeaways. But no, it's to do with the Vikings of the past. They brought their Norse ways when they invaded the lands. Or was it the other pirates with an angle? They're also known as the Saxons. They threw out the Brits and declared new days. They commemorate the fair Frigga of Freya instead of the Roman Venus, still being European and expressing the love for a good woman from both traditions. So to recap, Friday is about decent food, relaxation, and celebrating love. This next poem, which is called The Scarf, is also from Poetry in Motion. If I had a scarf of my own, I would wrap it around my own neck. It would provide me with the warmth I need on this freezing day. It would signify that I am looking after myself, and people would admire it from afar, knowing that I follow the best sports team or that I have a penchant for a bright colour, and it matches what I'm wearing or totally clashes, because that is what I want to show, that I am me and set my own fashion, and I no longer have to be vague about my life. Instead, I have no scarf. I am nothing. I have no identity. I am not wrapped snugly by anything or anyone. Every day is cold, even when the sun is out to supply warmth to me. I do not belong. So as you see, if you have a scarf to spare, then lend it to me. Instead of wrapping it on a snowman or woman, you may even see my frail humanity, my psycho-emotional, holistic being. I may even melt because I see love in its true form, and not be another statistic going berserk on the streets, causing havoc in your uncharitable world, unlike the fallen snow, which will melt away with no consequence, like the rest of the inconsequential, dripping down the drain with no understanding. I do not really need the physical woolly scarf, just that I feel warm and cherished. The act of giving it is enough, and I may be able to reciprocate, and then you will receive a scarf from me. This poem is called The Greatest Song I Shall Never Write, and this comes from my book, Poetry for the End of the Decade. The greatest song I will never write, the special thoughts, the descriptions of love, the wonder of it all, not written down. The words, uninformed by the writer, the unknown emotions kept secret from the world. They will never let loose their fragrance, their flora will never bloom, their hearts will never be uplifted from a state of melancholia. The joining of couples in desire unfulfilled, as oration is invalid. No speech, no notes, a void of existence, not composed upon a stave, whether treble or bass. No instruments to play the melody, caused the tune to become an earworm of life. No learning from the mistakes made, no resolution. Silence is deathly, no life, no voice. This final poem comes from my first book, which is called Mild Musing May Mitigate My Mentality, and the title is Blue Moon. Blue moon, I saw you above, 238,835 miles away, closer than some friends. So I looked up to see you, the man on the moon. Do you look down on me? What do you think? I wonder about you. Are you as portrayed in the Christmas adverts, waiting for a balloon or a rocket to visit? Or are you Aiken Drum, like my childhood rhyme, with your strange clothing, your cream cheesy hat, playing tunes upon your ladle and your own open mic? And moonshine, moonshine, am I drunk on your blue luminescence? Am I affected by your aura? No lunacy for me as I bathe in the light of you. For once in this blue moon, I'm not standing alone.
Big thank you to Joe Campling for that excerpt of some of his poetry. You're listening to The Archer on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host Dane Cobain, and this is Broken Colours with One Day.
is on the rise. It's up to me to take back. Age is just a number, we're all on our own track. One day will finally come when I don't need to worry and I don't need to run. Someday will finally come when everybody's happy and the world can carry on.
Train is coming over the hill, compelled down the rail track by our children's will, tracking through the dust bowl, coming down the line. The train is coming, but it takes time. The train is rattling down the dusty track, platform filling slowly, daylight fades to black, bridging over rivers, cutting through the woods. The train is coming as it should. Let him breathe, let him grow. These seeds of flow. Let him breathe, let him grow. These seeds of hope. These seeds of hope. Train is coming, kicking up the sand to take all the children off to slumberland. Freddie, little Jonah, Bo and Nancy Ray. It's time to go now, he can't stay. Let him breathe, let him go. Let him breathe, let him grow. These seeds of hope. These seeds of hope. coming over the hill, down through New Mexico, it's coming still. Pulling an ETNO, lifting off the earth, steaming through the sky for all she's worth. Train is whistling, whistling through the clouds, treetop kissing, cargo sleeping sound, wheeling round the hillside, landing on the tracks. Listen for the train, she's coming back. Let it breathe, let it roll. These seeds are full. Let it breathe, let it roll. These seeds are full. Let it breathe, let it roll. These seeds are full. Let it breathe, let it roll. These seeds are full. These seeds are full.
That was Seeds of Hope by Maz Manzini, and before that we had Broken Colours with One Day. You're listening to The Art Show on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain. And it's time for us to be joined by this week's guest, who is poet Joe Campling. Well, the first question, and I think you'll have a good answer for this one. Sometimes it goes somewhere, sometimes it doesn't, but it's a great one to ask writers, and it's a traditional opening question for me. So it's, what was the last book that you read, and what did you think of it?
My son-in-law, he wrote a book called Consistent Creative Content, which is on Kindle. His name's Lee Hall, and it's what it was is he's obviously, as I think we've spoken a while ago, that he obviously just writes books, but obviously how he gets himself out there. And so again, at the time it was a download from on Kindle, and I gave him he got a few pence from me for downloading, and it was actually it was downloaded by a lot, and obviously whilst it was interesting because it's like, you sort of know what you should be doing, but when you get somebody somebody telling you what you should be, how you should be advertising yourself, and how they've done it, and what worked, what didn't, you think, yeah, but why didn't I think of that in the first place? It's all fairly common sense, obviously with a bit of know-how. It's really quite, it's quite, and in fact, luckily his book, this seemed to do quite well, I'm very pleased to say. Right, so that's what it was called.
Awesome. Well, and I suppose with a book like that, the fact that the book itself is doing quite well kind of shows you that he knows what he's talking about, It's a bit like you wouldn't want to read a book on, writing advice from an author you'd never heard of, as opposed to maybe, again, something like Stephen King's on writing. It's like, well, fair enough, he knows what he's talking about.
That's correct. That's right. Yeah. I mean, again, he makes reference to that, the fact he read that book and how he started writing, and then how he got. This is my son-in-law Lee. How he started writing, but then obviously, it's fine that you think, oh gosh, so, and then how do I get myself out there? I put this stuff together, and I've got someone to publish it, but how the heck do people, how the heck do people want to read this stuff? How do I make it interesting? So it was very interesting to see his journey that way.
Yeah, awesome. And we'll come back to some of those sort of themes a little later in the interview, but I think it's a really nice way to segue into the question of how did you start writing? So how did your writing journey begin?
Gosh, yes. So when you're young at school and you start writing, I remember writing a poem something about scarecrow. I can remember that, and it was probably a prompt with a picture of a scarecrow, and I remember one where there was a crocodile with this woman's legs sticking out of it. So he looked a bit now I sort of reflect, they might look a bit Roald Dahl-ish. So I remember writing those, but I didn't really do anything with writing, and I wasn't very. I sort of got worse and worse through my school career about writing, and then I wrote a few poems for people. Just this is it, like someone got engaged and I wrote them a quick poem just on a scrap of paper and gave it to them, and they said, oh, thank you very much, and this is really nice, and didn't do anything till let me think. When it probably about 2013, I started writing limericks and keeping them on my phone. This is even before you could sort of do anything with them. They were just there sitting as documents in your phone. But then I started making more than limericks. They were longer, and I had sort of remember writing something when I was sitting at an airport while I was waiting for one of my colleagues, because we'd flown up to Edinburgh to a conference, and she was in a shop buying something. So I'd written this poem down, and I wrote a few more, and just based on where we were. And then when I hit 50, I went to an open mic, and I was trying to learn. I was trying to learn to play the guitar, and I still haven't learned to play the guitar. It's still rubbish. But I said, well, why don't you do some of your own stuff? So I thought, okay, well, I've got a few poems, so I got some scraps of paper out which I'd written poems on, and did this open mic, and people seemed to like it, so I just carried on writing. And then one day I was at an open mic, and somebody says, "Oh, I don't like this poem." Somebody was heckling me, and so this lady said to me, "Oh no, I really like poetry. Do you know the one by Pam Ayres? I wished I'd looked after my teeth."
Yeah.
So I thought, my phone out, looked up. I wished I looked after my teeth, and then we, so I read it, and then the next week I was. Funny enough, one of your friends, Dave, was at his open mic, and someone heckled him, shouting, "Get the poet on!" which was me. So Dave, obviously, so afterwards, Dave came up to me and said, "That's the funniest heckle I've ever had." And funny enough, this is when you and me got introduced, and I went to we did a spoken word in, and this is when I was writing more and more by then, and then obviously you explained how you sort of done your writing journey and about writing about books, and so this is where I sort of got myself into this, where I was writing a bit more for myself and other people as well. But just I did it for fun. I do it for fun really, and I found myself just sitting in places and writing, and then just performing it if I was at an open mic there and then, perfecting it a bit. He hopes.
Well, and one of the things I wanted to ask you in terms of the performances, like, how does it differ writing poetry to be sort of, I guess, read in terms of like maybe in a book versus to be read at an open mic? So what's the difference between writing for performance and writing for, solitary reading?
That's actually a very good question, in the sense of sometimes you write this stuff and you think, oh yeah, I'm going to be able to perform it, and when you actually do perform it, you realize actually this is better for someone to sort of sit down, maybe interpret in their own way, and get their own visions in their head, I suppose, of it. So there's some of my poems which I realize I've performed it once, and I'm not going to perform it again. But I still think it's a good poem, and it's very good to be read. And I think it just, you can make your own stories out of it. And that's, in a sense, that's what some people have been. One of my friends has heard me perform something, and then got my book, and then looked at one of my books, and said, "Gosh, when I read your poem, I really got what you were saying, but it's actually much better for me to read it."
Yeah.
So I think it's a mixture of both, really. Yes.
Well, and I find as well, certainly what's happened with me from some of the reviews I've had, a lot of people who've seen me read my poems, they then say when they read the poetry collection, they sort of read it with my voice inside their head, which I think is quite interesting.
Yes. I try to remember what do they think of my voice, but some people. I mean, the other bit is obviously performance. Some people, some people are quite critical of, or they said, "Oh, I think it was really good, but you should have read it slower." So then when you read it slower, they said, "Oh no, maybe you should have sped it up," or why doesn't your poem rhyme? And you think, well, not all poems rhyme, and and prose is fine, and it's that sort of everyone's a critic. which is fine, and sometimes you do learn from critique, but not sometimes from criticism. I call it as well.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. That's a good way of putting it. And I wanted to ask you actually. I mean, the question I've got written down is: does poetry have to rhyme? Why and why not? But also going back to you saying, you started with the limericks and then you've kind of progressed to long form stuff. I mean, limericks and things like haiku, for example, they have a very defined structure. And then you go all the way into free verse that really is just, there are no rules essentially. Which kind of poetry do you prefer to work in, or do you like a little bit of both?
I actually like both, and in a sense, when I started my poetry journey, I found that I was rhyming everything. And funnily enough, it was actually the very first open mic the first spoken word that I went to. This guy came up to me and said, and he was actually being quite hypercritical at that day. And I got my pen out the next morning, and I absolutely just wrote something. And when I read it afterwards, I realised it didn't rhyme at all. There was absolutely no rhyme in it at all. It was very, free verse, but I liked it. I think I called it something about criticism. Might have called it criticism or something. So again, it was a good, So, and I find that often I actually it's quite easy. Not say easy, but I often find myself writing free verse, and sometimes I find that I suddenly start putting rhymes in it. So then I sometimes go back and alter it. Not and it all rhymes. And then sometimes I just think as I'm writing, there's a bit that you allow yourself to have a bit of rhyming because it actually alters the flow and makes it change, and I think it's very rewarding sometimes. You think, gosh, that was. I remember when I started writing this, I went along this route thinking I'm not going to rhyme this, and those rhymes were good, but I think they just added a little bit into it having a rhyme, because then somebody picks on the rhyme or the clang and the associations of it all.
Yeah, and I suppose it depends on the piece as well, because some poems really benefit from rhyming. I think going back to limericks and even the Pam Ayres one, I wish I'd looked after me teeth. I think they benefit from rhyming, in that rhyming actually kind of enhances the humor of it in some ways. So I think humorous poetry in particular tends to benefit from rhyming. But again, equally, like let's say it's a really angry protest poem or something like that. A rhyming scheme would almost detract from it, because you kind of, you want to get that sort of like ranty, spur of the moment feeling from it. And I think I think it does depend upon the poem. And it's interesting you said that sometimes you'll go back and you'll like add those rhymes in, or you'll take them out. And I guess again it does just depend upon the poem and the kind of feel you're trying to get from it.
Exactly. I mean, it's a bit like I'm just going to use the word rap. There's lots of rhyme, but there's not always. It doesn't always. You go from rhymes and to non-rhyme to a different rhyme.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of rhyming, but not but para rhyming and all sorts of. Which is quite nice as well. So I've done a bit. I did. Someone challenged me to write some rap, so I wrote a rap song, which was quite interesting. Or rap that somebody which people seem to say, oh Joe, do that one. So I try, and it gets so it's fast and slow and it has a rhythm in it. So sometimes you need that rhythm with the rhymes. That, as you say, the free verse, as you get, if you're being a bit ranty or a bit, you want to get your point across, and the rhyme as you could detract from it completely.
Yeah. You're listening to The Archer on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm here in conversation with poet Joe Campling, and this is Altered Mindset with Same Street.
so we're not stuck in the middle. You try to stand, stumble and fall, resist the fight between us. Now we both understand the call, we're all just stuck in the middle. I felt so obsolete, you so indiscreet. We will never meet, two sides of the same street. Downtrodden and beat, you always on your feet. We will never meet, two sides of the same street. Knocked down outside and in distress, you're not what I am used to. You came from more, I came from less. Somehow we meet in the middle. I felt so obsolete, you so indiscreet. We will never meet, two sides of the same street. Downtrodden and beat, you always on your feet. We will never meet, two sides of the same street.
That was Altered Mindset with Same Street. You're listening to The Archer on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain. And it's time for us to be rejoined in conversation by poet Joe Campling. And that's interesting that you talked about that, because one of the things I wanted to ask is, like, how do you think poetry differs from lyrics, if at all?
Lyrics as in song lyrics.
As in song lyrics, yeah. And I suppose like rap lyrics kind of maybe form a bridge between the two of them.
Yeah. I suppose I think sometimes poetry can be seen as a form of, lyric. I mean, it can be. I suppose they're not. What's the word I'm trying to think of? They're not. Sometimes they can be the same or similarity. Poetry sometimes does work the lyrics, but lyrics of a song. But sometimes you can say a song is quite repetitive. Obviously, can be quite repetitive. But as you say, like we said, like I was saying, right, rap, which is sort of, those, you sometimes throw in the sort of the same bits, like my name is Joe and I know what I know, which is rhymes type of thing, but you can turn them around in different ways and rhyme. So again, songs people like to say that songs rhyme, but they don't all rhyme either, Yeah. I think there's a sort of what's the word? They're in the similar families, but they sometimes they converge or diverge.
Yeah, it's almost like cuisines, I suppose. So like anything with a written or spoken word is all falls under the umbrella of cookery and food. But different poetry is like, I don't know, Chinese cuisine, and then rap is like Indian cuisine, and so they all fit under that overall umbrella, but they're all kind of different as well, and different enough that they all fit into their own categories. Because I think you could look at a piece of writing and tell whether it was song lyrics or poetry. And the other thing as well is kind of as you were saying with song lyrics being repetitive. I mean, poetry doesn't have a chorus, or rarely has a chorus.
Really. Yeah, exactly. You're right, but the fact also something I was just reflecting on while I was thinking is when you're performing, sometimes some musicians will come up to you and say, "Oh, I like those words. I'd like to write a song using them." And you think, "Okay, well that's very interesting," Or I could I could use that for some jazz or something. That happened to me last week. I'm thinking, "Okay, that's very interesting. Thank you. Yes, maybe if we meet, we'll talk and we can use some of the words if you wish. That type of way." But so sometimes the poet is the one who sometimes feeds a lyricist, I suppose.
Yeah.
That way, you can see.
Yeah.
It.
Awesome, cool. So going back to the book you mentioned that you were reading, one of the questions I wanted to ask you is how do you get the word out about your poetry? And I suppose to tack onto that, is there anything that you're going to change now that you've read this book?
The answer is yes. I think I will change because I mean, I've been a bit lazy. Might be a bit strong, but it might be true that when I'm writing and I want to put and I want to and I want to say this is my new book. I need to. Sometimes I just concentrate on writing the book, and then I don't tell.
Yeah.
And suddenly I tell people when I've just published it, whereas I should, which I reality in reality I should be thinking like I'm going to publish this 3 months in time or 4 months in time. And okay, so I putting out teasers, whether that be using a blog, whether that be on my Facebook account, saying, oh, I'm in the middle of writing this book, or I'm about to publish this book. And maybe I'll put maybe use some of my so do a little video as it were. I mean, when I did my first book, for instance, I remember doing little videos saying, new book coming out in 3 weeks, new book coming out, so a sort of countdown. And then when some of the people who had read the book, I got them to send me or to do photos. So I then made a little video, or these are
very cool.
These are the people. So it looked like, and people saying, so that was good. And I didn't really do it. And I didn't really get to publish. I don't think when I looked at my second book, really, I didn't really go down that route as much as I should have. And okay, I have a reality. If people buy your first book, they buy it for many reasons, whether that be curiosity, they've seen family because they like you, people who've seen you perform, and then some. You get some curiosity. Second ones are the ones. Okay, well, you get a few family and a few friends, and then it gets less and less. But funny enough, I find, but I think, I'm going to say that the pandemic, for some reason, I didn't write I could have used some of that time. I mean, I read, reflecting back, that I had a book near enough ready to sort of launch, but I didn't. I missed it for a year, and I really, whether that was the fact of lack of company, or lack of people, and where I suppose was using some of my, let's say, the contacts with people, say, oh, I'm about to do this, I'm performing, and the whole post that the whole world sort of what various open mics, various spoken words had changed. People didn't, so it's about trying to rebuild those up. So, but when I did another book, I told I managed to get, because I was going to a spoken word. So people bought my books, and then people then sort of buying some of them on Kindle and other people, so I started getting a few sales that way, because I started putting it out a bit. So going back to what you say, so there was back to the book I've read, I suppose it's really going back to some of those things and think what worked, what didn't work, and luckily I can talk to my son-in-law as well, but to say, right, okay, well, if I'm going to do this, how would you suggest this? Some inside knowledge, some inside knowledge and help, which is quite good as well,
Yeah, it's like free consultancy. Well, and one thing I wanted to ask you, because and I don't know whether this is true for you, but certainly for me, I found the more you release books, that in a way, the harder it is to promote it, because when you release your first book, you're super excited. You've got this, your first ever book. And again, as you say, people are buying it just because they want to support you. As you get down the line, people start only buying your books because they actually really want to read your books. They don't, they're like, well, I've already bought one of your books, so I don't need to support you anymore. But I found with my first book, I kind of threw everything at the wall. I gave it everything that I had. And then I think for subsequent releases, it becomes a little bit harder to put that much effort and to put that much momentum in it, because it's kind of like, here we go again. It loses some of that novelty value, I suppose. At least that's what I found. And I wondered if you found the same with yours.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. I mean, for example, actually doing this chatting to somebody, chatting to you here on, and and it might get onto a radio. That's a new thing for me. But you obviously read, you go on the internet and you read, people in America, people go to libraries and they sit in libraries and they sell their books in libraries. And I remember pre-pandemic, I remember going to something in Slough where one of my friends who was publishing their book, or or two people who published their books sat and did that, and again, it wasn't a big audience, but there was a few people, and
Yeah.
obviously it gets out there on a on a flyer in some ways. So I think it's now, as you say, it's some of these things exploring, but you're right. As the more you publish, the more you write, the more books you out there, you realise. And it's also, I think it's also around the times that you publish as well.
Yeah.
Because I mean, it's now summer, so whether I do it in the summer or whether I hang on for a little bit longer, let's say if I've got something to go now, or it's when you can say Father's Day, for instance, buy this book for Father's Day, link it to something, buy this book for Christmas or Easter or whatever. There's and sometimes I mean, that's something I haven't quite explored as well, but it's linking it to this. It sounds very American, really, but linking it. But I suppose we've got to really get rid of this Britishness and really absorb and learn from other from other people as well. I think. And use our social media better in some ways. I mean, obviously, not everyone wants. Social. I mean, you can go over the top, but if you're doing, but the converse is, if you're not doing it at all, then you're definitely not going to get anything.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. Okay. Well, just to sort of wrap things up with, so first of all, well, what can you tell us about your book? So how many books have you got out, and what are their titles, and where can people get them?
Well, I've got 4 books out now. They're all on Amazon, so you can get them either on paperback or via Kindle. So the first book, which again I can say you helped me write or helped me publish, which was called Mild Musings May Mitigate My Mentality, which was obviously my alliteration at the time, and really writing was helping my mentality. Then my second book was called, which is called Merring, or is it Mrs. Gren? And that, as the title, what the title means is, when I was doing biology at school, we were taught that the mnemonic for the meaning of life was Merring, which is movement, excretion, respiration, reproduction, irritability, nutrition, and growth. So that's what Merring stood for. So then, when I was having a chat to my daughter at the time, who was doing GCSE biology, and I said, well, "Have you done Merring?" And she said, "I don't understand that. What are you talking about?" So I explained that, and she said, "Oh, we call it Mrs. Gren." So that was part of a conversation. So Merring, or is it Mrs. Gren? And I sort of divided books up using those sort of headings. I mean, there's some of them loosely based on there. So, like, if you think about respiration, talked about, you've got words like inspiration, which so there was a big inspire and things, and bits and pieces. So that was what my second book was. My third one, I ended up calling it Poetry for the End of the Decade, because it was 2020. And then my fourth, and the one that's still there, is called Poetry in Motion, which my son-in-law sent it to me as a laugh on my birthday and said, "Hi, you could publish a book with that title." And I said, "Okay," and I took it up. So that's that one.
It is a good title.
Basing on my name. And the one I'm writing, one I'm sort of going to probably publish fairly. The next one is, I've called it Sacrifice on the Altar of Poetry.
Awesome.
Which sounds quite deep and stuff. So we'll see how that goes. But so I'm sort of in the midst of just editing it and looking at moving it around so that it looks aesthetically. When you turn pages, you've got you have it one line on a page, or you've got it so it looks better. So that's, I may bring that out in maybe September or something like that. So I'm going to have to start advertising now, or September, October. See how I feel.
Awesome.
So that's probably my latest, but obviously that's where I say I've stopped writing, but I've got that one. But I've obviously in the bag, I'm sort of just going. You just have something, you just keep writing, and eventually next year or the year after, I have another one out there. Hopefully, we'll see. Having ambition,
Yeah, for sure. Cool. And just the last question. So, where can people follow you to stay up to date and find out more?
So I have an Instagram account, which is, I think, campling.joe. I have a Twitter account, which is, I think, Joe Campling. In fact, I have 2 Twitter accounts, but one is a poetry one, which is, you can find me, I think, Campling Joe. So that's, and I have obviously a Facebook account as well, which I think it's called Joe the Poet, is my page, my page on there, as well as my name, Joe Campling. So the 2. So that'll keep me up. I think I also have I have a blog which I don't write very on as well, which is I think it's Joe Campling Poetry. .com actually, yeah. So that's
Awesome.
So it sounds like I've got lots of stuff out there, but I'm not very good. I have to use it better.
Yeah, but that's, you read the book about it, so you'll be, you know, now you can use this as your excuse to start gearing up.
Yes, I'll be an expert one day.
Big thank you to Joe Campling for joining us. You're listening to The Art Show on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain.
I'm here like a line in the sand on dry land. Maybe I should be writing something to mean something to somebody, to me. But the words are like drip, drip, and somehow they don't wanna fit. There's a shift and it changes. I'm into different stages. I'm just sat here reflecting on my life, taking step by step. Sometimes I'm not walking or talking, lying on the carpet in a dreamlike state. Lying on the carpet in a dreamlike state. I'm just sat here reflecting my life, taking step by step. But sometimes I'm not even walking or talking, lying on the carpet in a dreamlike state. Is this my fate? To drift, to ebb and flow, to escape, and it's fall from the sky and land on me like snow. And all I can do is take it slow. All I can do is take it slow.
That was Dreamlike State by Joe Mars. You're listening to The Art Show on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain. And it's time for us to head over to the Ilk Shed now to catch up with Twangin' Jack Ford for this week's album review.
Are We Not Men? We Are Devo by Devo. It was on the Saturday Rock Show with Alan Freeman that I first heard Devo. They had licensed a track called Jocko Homo to Stiff Records, and it was causing a lot of interest. Alan Freeman seemed to be poised for complaints from his Freebird and Stairway-loving audience, but I was intrigued by its strange melodic guitar patterns that seemed to be playing outside of any kind of recognisable time or harmonic structure. The guitar would stop and a synth would stab violently in reply. It had a post-punk Talking Heads type vocal, but it was split into different sections like a prog epic. It reached a climax. It was almost like Bohemian Rhapsody's Delinquent Half-Brother. And it went out on an entirely different wave of tricky timed weirdness. I was visited by an American cousin who wanted to hear the UK version, because the US edit removed the line "God made man, but he used a monkey to do it." This album has those words, but it is missing a section where they sing about Ohio. There seems to be such a variety of versions that I'm not sure I have ever heard that single version since I gave my copy away when I thought I would never play vinyl again. Devo had some kind of philosophy about de-evolution, which no one really took that much notice of, though it was apparent they thought their music was some kind of stripped-down version of rock music. They did have a minor hit with their version of the Stones' Satisfaction, which stripped away the distinctive riff and the verse-chorus structure, leaving just a repetitive, slightly funky pulse. They were championed by Neil Young. This may have been the first time Neil Young seemed to be going rogue. They had a uniform, overalls and hats that looked like an inverted stack of flower pots. I saw Devo once at the Roundhouse. I sat in the balcony to watch their jerky robotic movements and was almost shocked when the frontmen suddenly ran forwards off the stage, which must have been about 4 foot high, and straight into the audience like automata responding to an abort mission command. They are probably better known for their later song, Whip It. Devo, are we not men? We are Devo.
Big thank you to Twangling Jack Ford for this week's album reviews. Thank you to everyone whose music I've shared. As always, you can find us by reaching out to me here at the studio on dane.cobain@wickhamsound.org.uk. That's dane.cobain @wickhamsound.org.uk. I'm particularly keen to hear from poets, performers, musicians, people with MP3s to share, people with local arts news. Don't hesitate to get in touch. You can also find us on Facebook. If you search for The Art Show on Wickham Sound, you should be able to find us. And we are repeated on Wickham Sound on Monday nights or on the Wickham Sound Listen Again, iTunes, Spotify, and wherever else you get your podcasts. So that's about it for another week. I'm going to leave you with one last tune, and this is Radio Generation with Milk and Alcohol. I'll catch you next week.
1, 2, 3, 4. Shove with his gun, sit up against the wall, son, and don't you run. You got it all.